One of the greatest obstacles to crafting health and wellness is identifying and controlling inflammation. It's at the core of all complex and chronic diseases, and it's the driving mechanism that underlies the most common symptoms that people like you struggle to overcome. Join us as we explore cutting-edge science and research to give you the information and tools you need to create the quality of life you want and deserve. And now, here is the host of Inflammation Nation, Dr. Stephen Noseworthy.
Hey there, it's Dr. Noseworthy. We're back again with another episode of the Inflammation Nation. And we're going to conclude our talk, our little mini-series on metabolic obstacles to weight loss or obstacles to weight loss. I know I've probably referred to it in different terms from time to time. Hope I didn't confuse you. But what we've done is we've talked through several concepts, right? And it's all geared towards helping you understand why you might be struggling with weight loss, even though you might be eating a calorie deficit or a low-calorie diet and maybe moving and exercising more. But we started out by recognizing that the old calories in, calories out model works only for people who have no metabolic obstacles to weight loss, and of course, who approach weight loss in a more scientific methodology. But for a lot of people, eating less and exercising more just simply doesn't work. And that's because of either one or more of several different common metabolic obstacles. And while there are many reasons, many different metabolic obstacles, I think it's useful just simply to focus in on the most common ones, which is what we've done in the last few episodes. Just to back up a little bit, I want to remind you that we started talking about this thing called the hypothalamic set point, and how after gaining weight and staying at a higher weight for a period of time, basically your body wants to keep you there. I mean, it's kind of like normal ground that your body will defend at all costs. And we know that weight loss, once it's achieved, has to be sustained for a period of, say, 4 to 6 months to get your hypothalamus to recognize your new weight as the new normal. That needs to be defended at all costs and not just slingshot you back to what your old weight was. We also talked about a more scientific approach to weight loss where you're not just week after week on end pursuing weight loss strategies, but really never trying to lose more than 10% of your body weight, your current body weight at any given time, and losing no more than 1% of your body weight per week. Other targets are typically not sustainable in the long run. And what that amounts to is, maybe about 10 weeks of dieting and exercise followed by taking a diet break where you eat maintenance calories for a month or so before you launch into your next 10% weight loss goal, losing on average 1% of your body weight per week. We also talked about how you need to overshoot your ideal body weight by about 5 pounds or so to account for the inevitable weight gain that happens when you stop your calorie deficit and you eat your new maintenance calories. But none of that, as necessary as they are, accounts for other issues that prevent weight loss, these metabolic obstacles that we've been talking about. And on that front, so far, we've talked about insulin surges and blood sugar control and how insulin surges and sustained high insulin can sabotage fat loss and actually encourage fat gain. So it's important to have eyeballs, if you will, or clarity on what your insulin level and your metabolic energy production, your blood sugar control is. We talked about hypothyroidism and how that determines your a lower basal metabolic rate, and how 90% plus or minus of all thyroid conditions have an underlying autoimmune reactivity to them, which if you have a thyroid condition, you need to know if your version of that is an autoimmune called Hashimoto's hypothyroidism. And if you don't deal with that at the level of the immune system and not simply just hormone replacement, you're not going to optimize your thyroid, improve your basal metabolic rate. You're probably not going to lose the weight that you want. We talked about inflammation in general, and inflammation is linked to all of these other metabolic obstacles. Maybe we should have put that first or last in the list, but it is what it is. But basically, we talked about how your inflammatory load, which can come from many different things, inflames your fat tissue and causes your fat tissue to secrete inflammatory chemicals and hormones that encourage fat gain and discourage fat loss. We also talked about dysbiotic overgrowth, let's call it gut infections. You can toss leaky gut in there as well, and changes to your microbiome, or more technically, your microbiota, and how that influences weight gain or fat loss. And then finally, today we're going to talk about the last item on the list, and that is toxins, environmental toxins that act as inflammatory drivers, referred to the discussion just a second ago, but also that act as hormone disruptors and obesogens. And we're going to focus on the obesogen part of that. Just a quick note on the endocrine disruption capacity of most environmental chemicals is that it seems to be that the estrogen and the thyroid systems are most susceptible to being disrupted. And if you've not heard me talk on this before, it's basically disrupted at all levels of how that system works. And that would be all the way up in the hypothalamus, the pituitary, as well as how hormones are handled when they're in circulation, how they're processed by enzymes, for example, or impacted by other mechanisms. And inflammation can change hormone receptor sensitivity so that maybe you don't get the same oomph out of your thyroid or your estrogen hormones, not because you don't have enough, but because the cells don't respond as well. Now, we're going to talk about the obesogen part of that. And the first thing I'm going to do is shameless self-promotion. I'm going to point you to the detox mini-series that I did earlier this year. You can just simply look back in the podcast list or search the podcast using the word detox. You'll find a handful of episodes where we talked about that in more detail. And I will also want to let you know about my 3D detox program that's available online. You can go to my website. I'll put the link down in the description for this episode. But simply go to drnoseworthy.com. And there's a link up top that says like do-it-yourself courses or do-it-yourself programs. And you'll find my 3D detox as well as thyroid 5-step gut protocol. And there's a handful of things that you might be interested in if you're the type of person who wants to learn on your own and make most of your own decisions. And I created this, not for the clients that I work with in one-on-one coaching, but for people who are more the do-it-yourself mentality and think, okay, I'm smart, I can figure this out. I just need a little direction and a little bit more education, and you want information that you can trust. There's a ton of updated and science-based information in the 3D Detox program. I start out by dispelling a lot of the mythology that surrounds detoxification. There is no one-size-fits-all, and if you have been working with practitioners who tend to do detox first and foremost in any given program, you're probably not working with someone who's up to date on the science, but I show you how to do this scientifically. And again, I'll put a link in the episode description if you want to check that out. And for the months of I'm just right on the eve of Canadian Thanksgiving. I'm still up in Canada. We'll be returning to the States probably in a couple of weeks or so. But nevertheless, what I'm going to do for the months of November and December, well, let's say to the end of the year, let's say to the end of 2022, I'm going to discount which the program was not expensive to begin with, but I'll apply a further discount for anyone who's listening to the podcast and wants to check it out. And if somebody who finds me on Google search and doesn't listen to the podcast comes across that page, they get a discount on the detox as well. There won't be any code. I'm just going to change the price to just keep it easy, so you don't have to worry about finding codes or putting codes in. Just know that I've discounted that price for the remainder of 2022. All right, so let's talk about chemicals and obesogens. To be honest, not all environmental chemicals act this way. Some chemicals might be, for example, endocrine disruptors, but not obesogens. As a general rule, they do tend to work in both domains, if you will. So a lot of chemicals that are obesogens are also endocrine disruptors and vice versa, but it doesn't automatically mean that. And we literally have decades of research on this. So this is not new concepts, but it just takes so long for new research to trickle down into academia so that new doctors are trained, or in seminars that doctors who've been around for a while can get exposed to this information. But I will tell you that the field of environmental medicine research theorizes that many of our modern day chronic diseases are linked to the increase of chemicals that started back with the Industrial Revolution and moving forward. And that situation has really just become worse and worse and worse every year, every decade for sure. Modern countries all around the world spew more chemicals out into the environment through, say, manufacturing plants, but also all these chemicals and toxins get incorporated into our food and into aspects of our daily living to the point where the literature literally says that exposure to toxins, like, for example, mercury, it's an inescapable fact of life. And that's a direct quote. And so when we look at the common chemicals that are classed as obesogens, they fall into several categories. And the thing is that every single person listening to this podcast has all of them in their bodies, right? The question is never, do you have a chemical toxin load? Because that's the world you live in. The question is, how is your body handling the chemical load that is already there? Now, certainly you may have some kind of an increased exposure. And I actually talk about this in the 3D detox program, because it's like audio and video and PDF handouts and lessons and all this kind of stuff. But I talk about some different stories. And I worked with a gentleman last year who owned an auto body repair shop. And he was working with certain types of chemicals that are really only used in that industry. And lo and behold, that's part of what we found when we did a toxin screening test on him. But not everyone works in an auto body shop, so I wouldn't expect everyone to have certain chemicals. But all of these common things that are typically classed as obesogens, again, fall into categories that we're all exposed to pretty much on a daily basis. So you can just kind of rest in the knowledge. I don't know, rest is the right word, but you can rest in the knowledge that you have a toxin load. The question is it messing you up, or are you handling pretty well, right? And so the truth is, two people can have the exact same chemical burden and their bodies can react completely differently. And one can be really sick with it and the other one sailing right along without any issues or any problems. And that's one of the reasons why standardized or kind of like pre-planned and canned detox programs don't work for so many people. Is because what you can't account for when you say do detox this way all the time is you can't account for the individuality of individual people. In fact, just this last week, I talked to two different new clients who had worked with multiple other practitioners before coming to see me. And all of the other practitioners, they didn't. In fact, one lady specifically asked me, she's like, you're not going to do a detox with me, are you? Because I've already done like 6 of those and some of them made me worse. But this is indicative of what's out there, because detoxification has been around for, I guess, time immemorial. And it's been done a certain way. And there's just been a lot of assumptions that were not based on science because it didn't exist at some point in the remote past. But nevertheless, a lot of the approaches and concepts of detox just kind of still hangs around. And these are some of the myths that I try to dispel in the beginning of the 3D detox program. But nevertheless, this is why it's so important to do detoxification right and to do it based on what we know from the scientific literature that's modern and up to date. So what are these chemical subtypes or categories that act as obesogens, and exactly what does that mean? Here are the most common ones. And again, everybody has these in their body. Things like pesticides and fungicides. Everything from the chemicals that you and your neighbors may spray on your lawn or in your garden, to the chemicals used in farms, manufacturing, agriculture in general, even things that are grown organically and have like organic labels, or you buy them at the health food store and pay an arm and a leg for them. They all have some level of these chemicals. Like, organic doesn't mean chemical free. It just means chemical less. It's just less than what you see with regular produce. So please don't think that if you buy fruits and vegetables that are organic, that you are completely eliminating your exposure to things like pesticides or fungicides or other similar type chemicals, because unfortunately you're not. Even if you do find a source of fruit and produce that really has nothing sprayed on top of it, there's 2 things that you can't really account for. Number one is maybe the farm next to the farm you bought from sprays chemicals on their crops and the wind brings it over onto the organic farm's crops. That happens all the time. But more than that, a lot of the toxins that enter into plants come from the soil. And believe it or not, the major source of toxins that are found in the soil are worldwide volcanic eruptions. So good luck controlling that variable. That's just the bottom line. Everyone's toxic. It's in our food. We just have to learn how to deal with it. And then on an individual basis, grapple with the question as to whether or not a given individual person's toxin load is actually causing part of their problems, right? Again, it's not do you, it's it's not do you have a chemical burden? You do. It's whether or not it's messing you up metabolically. Yeah, back to the categories. Things like chemicals derived from petroleum and gas products. That's, again, inescapable in modern day societies. Chemicals that are classed as flame retardants, and these are very common. They're used on all of our textiles, drapery, bed sheets, even in furniture, mattress material. In fact, many countries, I believe the U.S. included, I'm going to go out on a limb and say this, I'm fairly certain it's either the entire U.S. or the state of California, because they're kind of at the vanguard of many of these different strategies. But they actually mandate that baby clothing, like toddler and infant clothing, contains flame retardants, as do baby mattresses that you might put in a bassinet or a crib, and the blanket that you throw on top, and all of those kind of things. So again, bottom line is these chemicals are in everything and everywhere. The next category would be things like personal care products and cosmetics. So soaps, shampoos, lotions, makeup contain chemicals. The most common ones are phthalates and parabens, and these are known endocrine disruptors, as well as obesogens. And then finally, bisphenol A or BPA and other plastic-related compounds. And you might be thinking, well, I know that, and I've gone BPA free. So all of your water bottles are still plastic, but they're made out of something other than BPA. Well, guess what? They're made out of BPS or BPAS or BPF. And the research now is saying that these things that replace bisphenol A can be just as problematic in terms of endocrine disruption, as well as acting as obesogens. And so your best strategy is to ditch your Nalgene bottle or your BPA-free plastic stuff and just simply go glass and stainless steel. That's very clearly your best strategy. All right. Now, what are obesogens? I guess you can probably guess it from the name. I'm pretty sure that I've mentioned it a couple of times. So basically, obesogens have three known effects. One is fat cell hyperplasia and or hypertrophy. We've talked about that in some of the other, like for example, in the episode where we talked about the inflammation, your fat mass can grow either by adding new fat cells or by increasing the size of the fat cells that you already have. And both of those are problematic. Number one, because you can store more chemicals, et cetera, but it tends to be that the hypertrophic, the increasing of your current fat cells in terms of their own individual size, rather than adding new fat cells, tends to be the more metabolically disturbing situation, right? So obesogens, again, have three known effects. Number one is changes in your fat mass, either by adding new fat cells or by increasing the size of the ones you have. Number two, obesogens decrease your fat burning potential. So they directly interfere with the mechanisms and hormones and systems involved in breaking down fat into free fatty acids so that you can push them through what's called beta oxidation and then create energy from that. So that system kind of gets tanked. And also there tends to be a negative impact on hunger and satiety. And it can flip-flop either way because these are, again, complex signaling systems. And we can't predict if it's, a chemical is always going to do this or that as it relates to hunger and satiety. But suffice it to say, what's going to happen is either you're hungry all the time when you have no physiological need for food, or you need food and you're not hungry. And so you don't eat. And both of those can be problematic, obviously, I think, for different reasons. So one of the big questions as it relates to, like, if we start from the premise and the truth that everyone has a chemical load, and a lot of these chemicals are endocrine disruptors, pro-inflammatory, and classified as obesogens, how do you know you have a chemical load, which you do, that is impacting your weight loss? That's a big question, right? How do I know that that's part of the picture? Well, I'll share with you what I teach in the doctor-only seminars that we teach around the country. Number one, and there's three things. Two of them are common to other things. One is much more specific to obesogens, and we'll leave that for the last. But number one, if you have resistant weight loss, right? You're cutting calories and you're exercising more, and you cut calories more and exercise even more, and it still doesn't budge the scale or change your body composition, right? Resistant weight loss. Again, that, as well as the next one, which is weight loss stalling after a good start. Like you lose an initial 10, 15 pounds, you're all excited, and then it just stops And no matter what you do, you can't get past that particular obstacle. So those first two items are common to all of the metabolic obstacles, so including gut dysbiosis, thyroid, insulin, blood sugar control, and just your general inflammatory state. Now, I would be inclined to think that those first two items, resistant weight loss or weight loss stalling after you start out pretty well, I would be more inclined to say that there's a chemical component to that if you, as part of your symptom constellation, have some degree of chemical sensitivity. Maybe you've already have been forced to change your personal care products or cleaners in your home or whatever. Maybe you're sensitive to odors and smells. I would start thinking, well, maybe there's a chemical component to this resistant weight loss or to this recurrent stalling problem that we can't solve. But when it comes to understanding if your chemical load is impacting weight loss from an obesogen standpoint, the main thing that you're looking for, the main clue that you're looking for is the inflammatory flare-up and the weight rebound that comes when you lose weight. Here's why. We've talked before about how these chemicals are stored in fatty tissues, the largest portion of that being your body fat. So it's going to store in your body fat, it's going to store in your bone marrow, it's going to store in your neurological system, your brain, because it's made mostly of fat. And in any other organ system, like, for example, your liver, that you can create a fatty liver, you're going to store more chemicals there. So these chemicals are stored in fatty tissues. When you start to lose weight, you break down the contents of the fat cells, not just the fat, but basically you release stored chemicals. And it's like getting an acute exposure. If I do have a chemical burden and I have chemicals that act as obesogens and I go out and I make some changes and all of a sudden I lose 15 pounds, I'm going to release the chemicals that are stored in the fat cells that I just broke down to liberate the fat. So it's not just the fat that comes out, it's all the other stuff that's inside your fat cells. And again, that's like getting an acute exposure. Call it dumping toxins, if you will. And the result is an acute surge of inflammation. And by now, you should remember that inflammation messes up fat loss in several different ways. It enhances fat formation, so it's real easy to get fat. It decreases fat burning, so it's really hard to lose fat. And again, it causes the fat cells themselves, these adipocytes, to become inflamed, and they start churning out even more inflammatory chemicals and hormones that screw up things like hunger and satiety. And your body has to deal with that chemical dump, that toxin mess. And if it doesn't, then it really can screw you up. So let me repeat that the main clue that you're looking for to figure out whether or not you have a toxic chemical load that includes obesogens that is impairing fat loss is that you might lose weight, but all of a sudden you flare up, you get systemically inflamed, and that might present different ways for different people. And then you regain the weight that you just lost, and usually there's a rebound effect, and you might gain 2 to 4 to 8 to 10 pounds more than what you had just lost. And if you have experienced that just once, but then things started up again and you just kind of started moving forward, that's not a big deal. But I'm assuming if you're listening to this episode, it's because you have resistant weight loss, or maybe you experience these stalls. The key question as it relates to obesogen is that, do you have this pattern where you lose weight and then you stall, you hit a wall, and you flare up and you gain all that weight back and a little bit more? If that's what you're dealing with, then I can almost guarantee that you are dealing with a toxin load that includes obesogens that are also obviously pro-inflammatory, yada, yada, yada. And dealing with that situation is the most important thing for you to look at. Now, what does that mean? When it comes to quick, practical strategies, the first thing I do is in my 3D detox course, which you may or may not be interested in, that's okay, but I'll just kind of break it down into the main different steps so you can understand the framework. But one of the first things that I do before I do a detox, I do a pre-tox. Right? A pre-tox are the things that you can do before you start a detox that actually makes your detox more efficient and more effective. And a lot of docs don't even think about this. They just here's your liver support, here's your gallbladder support, here's your whatever, your heavy metal chelation, and let's just cross our fingers and hope that we don't screw you up. Right? There are some steps that you have to take in the pre-tox phase that will prevent detox from being a bad experience for you and increase the probability that you'll actually have a successful outcome. And then the second phase is the detox phase itself. It's the process of supporting phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 of the detox mechanisms, which are tied to liver, gallbladder, and ultimately gut health. And then the third stage is what we call deep tox, DEEP as in Paul, deep tox. And that's the process of drawing toxins from deep storage and then repairing the cellular damage that's done by toxins that have been stored for years. And we delay that, like getting access to toxins that are stored deep in your cells, because if you're not ready to pull things out of storage, then it's just going to blow you up from an inflammatory standpoint, and things are not going to work well. So what about pre-tox? Let's just talk about that very briefly, and then we'll put this episode or bring this to a close and put this little mini-series to bed, if you will. What is a pre-tox strategy? There's a couple of other components, but very simply, start by ditching all your plastic, like for water and for food storage. Like, forget about it. Go to stainless steel and go to glass. Plastic is the devil in this regard. Replace all of your harsh chemical household cleaners with the more natural stuff. And there's so many options out there. Like 10 years ago, there was like 1 or 2 companies on the internet that you had to order things online. Of course, 10 years ago, everyone was ordering online. Let's go back 15, 20 years. Very obscure companies that made a handful of products that hardly anybody knew about, right? There was a time when we really just didn't have many options, but now you can get natural cleaners, like maybe it's 7th generation or Mrs. Meyer's, and there's other companies out there. So I'm not endorsing these specifically. These are things that coming to my mind. You can get these in your local grocery store now. It's like grocery stores because, it's a demand and supply issue. The demand is there. So the grocery stores are starting to carry things that are not harsh chemical cleaners. And they might be based on, like citrus oil and enzymes, and they're just not harsh chemical cleaners. And the toxin load will go down if you make those switches out. And the final thing is you can change personal care products and cosmetics. And again, grocery stores, health food stores carry these. You can get all kinds of stuff online. They're not that I'm endorsing it, but there are companies that have like multi-level marketing. And in many cases, they actually make good products. And you might have an opinion about multi-level schemes. I don't participate in any of those. Some people love them. Some people hate them. But nevertheless, it is no problem nowadays. You can just go to CVS or Shoppers Drug Mart if you're in Canada, or Walgreens, and you can just walk in and you can look at stuff, look on the label, and look for things that are free of phthalates and parabens. Those are the primary 2 chemicals that are in personal care products and cosmetics. Again, any number of different options for you. Sometimes it just takes going online and Googling natural shampoos in my area, something like that. Or just go to the health food store, go to the grocery store and just look around, ask the staff, and they'll be able to point you in the right direction. Okay, so we're going to close out this particular mini-series. I'm pretty excited because in the next episode, I actually do my first interview. It's just been me for the last 8 months or so, droning in your ear. And next week, our next episode, I am going to be interviewing Risa Grew, who is a functional nutritionist out in California. She's worked with some pretty high-profile people, celebrities, if you will. She's got a book coming out called Diet is a 4-Letter Word, and we talk about that and a whole bunch of different topics. So there you have it. I'll leave the description for my 3D detox program down in the episode description. I'll leave the link down in the description, and hopefully I'll see you for my first interview with functional nutritionist Risa Grew. Take care. We'll see you soon. Thank you so much for listening to the Inflammation Nation. If you found this episode valuable, please rate, review, and subscribe to our podcast. Be the first to know when a new episode drops so that you can stay on top of your game. It also helps others like you find the answers they need. And why not head over to my main website, drnoseworthy.com, that's drnoseworthy.com, to explore my personalized functional medicine coaching programs, submit a question to the podcast, maybe take a quiz, or even reach out to me using the contact form that you can find there. We'll see you next time.